Hi, class. So we're going to be talking about labor relations in this class, obviously. But one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that there are a lot of acronyms. So just take your time going through all of the information in the book. The other thing that I want to let you know is that these videos and lectures are just an overview of the different chapters in the book. So you're going to find a lot more information in the book itself. I encourage you highly to read the chapters so you can get all of the information and all the context. And then at the end, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. So chapter 1 is about union management relationships and putting them into perspective. So there's a couple different phases in the labor relations process. The first is recognition of the legitimate rights and responsibility of the union and the management representatives. Then there's negotiation of the labor agreement, including appropriate strategies, tactics, and impasse resolution techniques. And then there's the administration of the negotiated labor agreement, which is applying and enforcing the terms of the agreement on a daily basis. Some characteristics of the labor relations process are the negotiation and administration of work rules, because they can vary considerably across public and private sectors. If you look in the book at Exhibit 1.1, you'll be able to see the elements of the labor relations process. There's a focal point of labor relations, which is work rules, and you can see those examples of work rules in Exhibit 1.2. So it pertains to compensation as well as employees and employers' job rights and obligations. They can vary according to their applicability to many occupations and to the extent to which they are specific. And they reflect the dynamic nature of labor relations as work rule existence and or consistent changes over time. There are some key participants in the labor relations process: management officials and consultants, union officials, employees who have dual loyalties to both the union and the company, the government, which specifically is the National Labor Relations Board, and there can be third-party neutrals such as mediators or arbitrators. There are basic assumptions that underline the U.S. labor relations. Those assumptions are the adoption and support of free enterprise economic systems in the United States create an inherent conflict of interest between employers and employees. Both the employers and the employees seek to advance their own self-interests. Employees in a free and democratic society have a right to independently pursue their employment interests using lawful means. And collective bargaining provides a process for meaningful employee participation through independently chosen representatives in the determination of work rules. Some of the basic characteristics of the private sector for U.S. labor relations system: it's a bilateral process, both union and management, governed by the framework of labor laws. It's a highly decentralized and localized bargaining structure. There is a recognition of key legal principles of majority rule and exclusive bargaining representation. And it permits use of economic pressure, so that deals with strikes, lockouts, picketing, and boycotts, and we'll talk about that in future chapters. It encourages use of final and binding arbitration and significant employer opposition to employee efforts to organize and bargain collectively. The constraints or influences affecting participants' negotiation and administration of work rules: the state of the economy, both nationally, internationally, and it can be firm-specific. The labor markets: what are the skills? What are the wage levels? Is there supply and demand? The product or service market, where the company either sells its product or services or purchases the key elements for creating its products or services. The financial market: technology makes a huge change in the pace and scheduling of work, the characteristics of the work environment, tasks that have to be performed, and even information exchange. There can also be international forces. If we're talking about free trade or NAFTA or globalization. And again, those things we'll talk about in further chapters. And then there's also public opinion. So influential individuals and organizations within the community can have attitudes towards different aspects of a company. Let's talk about union membership itself. And if you look in your book at Exhibit 1.4, you'll get some information about it. So there is a steady decline in total membership of unions. There's lower union density. So the union is proportional to the total labor force. And some of the causes for this are structural changes in the labor force. Employment is shifting from manufacturing to service industries. And there's a demographic shift too. So there's more females in the industry. There's older workers. We're very diverse. And there's a lot of part-time workers in the workforce these days. A lot of organizations are putting through practices to avoid unionization and make sure that employees are happy and don't want to go the route of a union. And there's also economic and political climate that will cause a reduction in union membership. Employment laws are now reducing the demand for unions because the employees are being covered by certain laws. In looking in Chapter 2, it's about the history of labor management relationships. There were two interrelated dimensions: the relationship between labor and management organizations and organizational characteristics of labor organizations. To compare the effectiveness of the labor organization, it needs to be structurally and financially stable. Its ability to work within the established political and economic systems needs to be established. And there's a degree to which the broader social environment, like laws, media, and public opinion, are supportive or oppositional to the labor organization's goals and tactics. And the union leaders need to have the ability to identify and satisfy members' goals and interests. A brief overview of unions in the United States before 1869 is that there were guilds and joint associations of employers and craftspeople. There were local markets and small firms. The factory system in the 1850s improved transportation, created larger markets and larger firms. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution grants Congress the right to pass regulating interstate commerce, which includes labor laws. The common law doctrine, which is still in use today, is the employment at will doctrine. The courts continue to apply the civil conspiracy doctrine. A labor injunction is a court order restricting certain activities in a labor dispute. And many employers required their employees to sign yellow dog contracts, which stipulated that employees may not join or organize a union. In 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was proposed, and that restricted power to corporations to engage in anti-competitive practices. In 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act was established, and that specifically allowed the existence of labor unions. Interpretations of Clayton by Supreme Court watered down its effectiveness as it became easier for employers to get labor injunctions. The Knights of Labor had a goal that included long-range economic and social reforms, which were greatly influenced by a personal philosophy of Powderly. It was a pyramid-style organizational structure with the centralized authority resting at the top. There were strategies that included political actions, education, encouragement of cooperatives, and active avoidance of strikes. But the KOL failed because it had faulty assumptions about the halting and reversibility of technological advances, the extent shared interest of employees and employers, and among different types of employees. there was a lack of protective legislation for union and a lack of leadership identification with members' interests. In 1886, there was a push for an 8-hour workday. Samuel Gompers was a strong advocate for this. There was a violent aftermath with both police and citizens being killed, and that resulted in a backlash of organized labor, which included the KOL. Then there was the emergence of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and it was formed under Gompers' leadership from national unions that were expelled from the KOL. It's not one big union. Instead, member unions join the Federation for its services and retain their separate entities. The goals included an emphasis on short-range material benefits like economic betterment, enhancement of existing capitalist industrial system, and avoidance of long-term philosophical commitments or social reform. The strategies and tactics of the AFL were to use strikes as a viable collective bargaining tactic. They increased involvement in the political arena, and they wanted to advance the public status and reputation of organized labor and the collective bargaining process. The AFL was organized with exclusive union jurisdiction for each craft or trade, and it was a decentralized authority through voluntary association. In 1892, there was the Homestead Incident, which was a violent confrontation over wages at the Carnegie Steel Works. Although it represented a victory for management, the strike strengthened the AFL by demonstrating to employees that organizations' concerns for helping its members can outweigh what management can do. In 1894, there was a Pullman strike, and it was a protest over unilateral wage cuts while prices for rent and food in the company-owned town remained the same. The American Railway Union, which was independent from the AFL, faded out of existence owing to negative public opinion. There was a use of federal troops and injunctions, and Pullman management was resistant, and it lacked the support of the AFL. The Industrial Workers of the World, or IWW, was organized in 1905 with the objective of overthrowing the existing capitalistic system by any means possible. It failed because of the lack of permanent membership and financial base, the inability to appeal to members' interests. It was identified with sabotage and violence, and there was an alienation of the news media and government officials. When we move into the era of World War I and World War II, there were some problems, but some prospects also for unions that wanted to organize after World War I. Post-war economic conditions led to unsuccessful strikes that weakened the unions. Union membership declined in the 1920s due to aggressive counteractions by employers and organized labor's inability to overcome anti-union sentiment among potential union members. Labor's inability to overcome anti-union sentiment was due to good economic conditions in the roaring 1920s. Corruption and racketeering was happening in the unions, and there was an infiltration by political radicals and communists. Then there was the rise of the Congress of Industrial Organization, or the CIO. The AFL did not want to enroll semi-skilled employees. The CIO broke away from the AFL to organize employees in mass production industries like steel, auto, and electrical. CIO membership grew quickly, owing to strong leadership, realistic goals, effective use of sit-down strikes, passage of favorable legislation, and positive changes in employee attitudes towards the union. After World War II and to present day, there were some developments that happened in organized labor since World War II. There was a new collective bargaining issue. Unions directed efforts towards job security in the face of technological advances, new types of benefits, and wages that tied to fluctuations in economic cycles, such as cost of living adjustments. Organization of women, minorities, and professionals in the public and private sector who were serving in industries was increasing. And there was a merger of the AFL and CIO in 1955. There are some aspects of organized labor that remain unchanged since World War II. There's exclusive representation, collective bargaining agreements, government policies of non-intervention in labor relations, union involvement in politics, difficulty in achieving consensus among unions and among union members, and continued pursuit of short-range economic and job security goals instead of long-range reform. So that's a brief overview of Chapter 2 and kind of the history that went along with labor relations. Again, if you have any questions about Chapters 1 or 2 or anything in the syllabus, please reach out and let me know. Please make sure that you are posting to your discussions in a timely manner so you can get an appropriate grade, and let me know if you need anything.